All right, I'm a Canadian. My name's Greg. Let's get into this. We're going to be reacting to this video from JJ McCollough. And you know what? I really like JJ McCollough. I like his content. I've seen his content. A lot of Canadians have probably seen his content. He has certainly made great informative videos about Canadian politics, Canadian history. Quite frankly, JJ McCollough has probably taught me more about some aspects of Canadian history than I have learned in public school. So shout outs to him.
Hello, friends.
Hello, friends. Let's get into it. This is JJ McCollough's Canada's Trucker Protest, a fair and objective analysis.
My name is JJ, and I am finally back home after spending an entire month in fabulous Washington, D.C. In a truly bizarre twist of fate, I wound up going on my big month-long holiday, the first substantial holiday I have taken from this channel in many years, during the 1 month that Canada has made more international news than it has in at least a decade. I refer, of course, to the Great Truckers' Protest of February 22. During the last month, I was subject to an endless flurry of requests, both from you guys and people in the mainstream media who wanted to hear my take on the whole thing, which was very flattering because I know I have established this reputation as Mr. Canada over the years, and in ordinary circumstances.
I mean, I guess certainly on online circles, I have a whole lot to say about how there's this sort of class of people who are like representing Canada. There's this other guy on TikTok who like makes all these skits about the different provinces, and it's like, ha ha, yeah, that's what Canada is, you know, ha ha ha, all the stereotypes of the different provinces, and it just seems like such a cheap, lame cop out of what I actually think Canadians are and Canada is, you know. Not to say that, again, not to try and rip on the guy, but it's like, you're the best we got, JJ. Like you're Mr. Canada. Okay. All right. I gotta stop getting sidetracked here. Let's get into this. Let's get into the
circumstances. Canadian affairs are indeed my favorite thing in the world to talk about, but it proved a uniquely challenging thing to do amid all of the travel and the various other projects I had going on in DC, and frankly, just my desire to take things easy for a bit. But anyway, I am now finally back in Canada, and the trucker protest is basically over, which I guess I can spin as actually being the perfect time to talk about the issue, because we are now a bit further removed from it. So let us get into it.
I think I would disagree with that, saying that because he published this in 9 months ago, March 5th. The best time to talk about it, there's still so much stuff that's happened since then that still is not even like settled. Like there was an inquiry recently, and more importantly, this was before the arrests started. There was all these arrests. I guess, sorry, that's not entirely true. There were arrests for a lot of people, obviously, out the convoy, but you know, this is before. I think this was Chelsea. You're in chat. Was this before Randy was charged? When was Randy charged? There's a lot of stuff that happened after the convoy and has been ongoing still. That is part of that I think is part of the convoy equation, because this isn't just about the trucker convoy. This is about like the sort of slow rise or acceptance of this authoritarian government that we have in Canada, right? But I do want to also comment on the fact that this guy was out of the country. You know, JJ McCollough was out of the country, and we're going to find out later that this analysis of the trucker convoy is really just not necessarily a fair and objective analysis, but more of like I read the headlines when I was out of the country analysis of the convoy. But anyway, let's get into it here.
Spin as actually being the perfect time to talk about the issue, because we are now a bit further removed from it. So let us get into it. Okay, so for anyone who needs a quick refresher, on January 28th, 2022, hundreds of truckers in big rigs, comprising something they called the Freedom Convoy, descended upon the city of Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada. At the protest's peak, there were over 500 trucks occupying this so-called red zone, which is the downtown core of the city, around many of the most important government buildings, including the Parliament of Canada.
500 trucks. Can we get a fact check on that? Wasn't it at the inquiry they said it was over 700 vehicles, the longest convoy? And then also the other thing there is, what about all the trucks that were not in the red zone? there was trucks lined up in all sorts of other areas, not just in the red zone. So, but then again, he wasn't even in the country when this happened. He's just kind of like reading the headlines from CBC or CTV or whatever. So there you go.
Around many of the most important government buildings, including the Parliament of Canada. The downtown occupation, in turn, choked off many other streets, including commercial and residential areas, making a significant chunk of the city all but inaccessible. There is currently
significant chunk?
Making a significant chunk of the city all but inaccessible.
That is definitely not accurate. Pretty well most streets, there was a through street where you could drive. The only exception to that was Wellington. Unacceptable Views does a great kind of debunking of that near the beginning of that documentary. So again, misinformation. It sounds like a lot of this analysis is basically regurgitating misinformation that JJ has consumed while out of the country, reading the headlines. And I got to emphasize, too, he doesn't even I watched this earlier today, so I'm like really livid about it. He doesn't even mention the misinformation around the trucker convoy, like all the things that came up, the desecrating the war memorial, desecrating the Terry Fox statue. Like there's so many things that the media did to try and make the larger population hate the convoy. And what's totally missing from JJ's analysis here, spoiler alert, he doesn't talk about the role that the media played in this whole protest. Like he doesn't talk about the misinformation and the lies from public officials. There's so many things that he misses in this video, but we'll keep going. We're not even 2 minutes in, so let's keep this moving.
There is currently a class action lawsuit of local businesses affected by the blockade, claiming over $306 million in damages. The trucker occupation lasted.
It really sucks. Sorry to pause it again, but it really sucks how like even JJ, who's supposed to be this like conservative, is not going to like look at the economic damage in the greater context of restrictions from lockdowns. Like I get it when a mainstream media person does that. I totally understand when a mainstream media person does that. They're paid by Justin Trudeau. Obviously, they're not going to talk about the economic damage that lockdowns cost. But it's like you're a conservative YouTuber, and like you're not going to mention that anyway. I guess he's supposed to be fair and objective, right?
For 3 weeks and quickly assumed a carnival-like atmosphere. There was music and a bouncy castle and a hot tub and barbecues and all the rest of it. And lots of honking. My God, the honking. There was actually a whole other class action lawsuit just to get them to stop. In short, the truckers were incredibly obnoxious, and that's not just me passing judgment. This was a protest, so the goal was very much always to be loud and annoying, both to get attention and also to have something to use as leverage with the authorities.
So the honking did stop. A lot of the honking stopped after, I think it was the first weekend. I think it was the first Wednesday after I might have to fact check on this, but the first Wednesday after the protest started, they decided that they will stop honking basically all throughout the day, and they would only honk during the day, if I'm not mistaken. So there was some sort of negotiations there. So the idea that it would the truckers were obnoxious the whole time for 3 entire weeks, that's not accurate. And there's a lot to say. Like, was it a positive that the truckers stopped honking? Like, was that a good thing? A lot of people were like, oh yeah, we want to get along with Ottawa and be better. But I don't know. This is a whole other discussion, whole other video. Did the protest kind of be weak when we got there? Did we kind of continue to kind of lessen our position, not be as aggressive? Because really, to get what we want, should we not kind of escalate in a certain respect? But that's a whole other conversation. But to say that we were obnoxious the whole time, that's certainly misleading. Because after the first week, there was not honking all the time. It was only during certain hours during the day, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah.
The truckers in Ottawa got most of the attention. It is worth noting that there were smaller copycat protests in other parts of Canada as well. The most notable was a trucker blockade that was set up on the Ambassador Bridge for 7 days. The Ambassador Bridge being the busiest point of cross-border trade between Canada and the United States. There was also a similar border crossing protest in Coutts, Alberta, and one in Emerson, Manitoba, plus lots of smaller solidarity rallies in scattered cities across the country. All right, so now let us get to the $10 million question. What were they protesting? This is a question I tend to be pretty cautious about when it comes to large-scale protest movements.
So the answer to this is like the answer to this is so cut and dry that even a recent I'm switching videos here for a second. The answer to like what they were protesting is so cut and dry, JJ, that even CBC in a recent report actually got the answer to that question right.
And protesters, all here in opposition to vaccine mandates, vaccines themselves, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government.
Well, okay, that's not entirely correct, but against the mandates, people getting their jobs back. This was why the protest was so massive. It was an idea ending these mandates, bodily autonomy. That's what it comes down to. So the next part of this video is like so goofy. But anyway, so this is JJ's analysis, fair and objective analysis of why the biggest protest in recent Canadian history happened. This is what the protest was about, guys, according to JJ.
Be cautious about when it comes to large-scale protest movements, not just in Canada, but in other countries too. I visited Santiago a few years ago when they were in the midst of a very intense protest movement of their own, and in the ensuing video I made, I tried to emphasize how these protests weren't really about a single thing per se, but rather a sort of broader expression of left-wing malaise towards the perceived corruption and indifference of the Chilean system more broadly. I think the Canadian truckers' protest is best thought of in a similar way. It is perhaps best understood as a movement of broad right-wing malaise towards the perceived oppressions that Canada's governments have imposed on the public during the COVID-19 pandemic.
No, dude. Like, no, you're just flat out wrong. Like, does this person look like this is someone who I interviewed. There's a paramedic that got laid off. Does this look like, does this person speaking, does this sound like right-wing malaise to you?
Someone told me that you are a paramedic?
That's right, yeah, I was with Toronto.
And what happened?
They terminated me because of the mandates, and I'm a single mom. I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life, and I don't really have that much support. And because this issue has dividing families and friends even further, it's like you have limited resources to reach out to. So I think it is a way of like phasing people out and kind of canceling people altogether, right? If you don't go along.
You seem very calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah, JJ. It was right wing. It was right wing malaise. That's why the protest was happening. It's like, dude, people are getting laid off because they didn't want to take an injection. One that is turns out that this injection is, I'm not going to talk to the science because we're on YouTube and Facebook right now, but it turns out this injection, the people who questioned it had every single right to question it and to not take it. I am so tired of this perspective of like, oh, they wanted to overthrow the government. Why were the people there protesting? It's like, dude, bodily autonomy. They got the no feeling. They didn't want to get injected with this product, and they were losing their jobs. They couldn't bring their kids to like regular activities, like couldn't even go to a restaurant. And while we're on the topic, another thing that JJ does not bring up is how things were really hitting a fever pitch right before the convoy. This is January 19th, 2022, so like 10 days before it started. More than 1 in 4 Canadians support jail time for the unjabbed. Like that's kind of where we were at right before the convoy started. Right-wing malaise. Like, fuck off, dude. Fuck off. Pardon my language, but like, man, right-wing malaise. Give me a break.
Imposed on the public during the COVID-19 pandemic. In theory, the spark that triggered everything was Prime Minister Trudeau's decision in early January to require all truckers returning to Canada from the US to be fully vaccinated.
Truckers will have to be fully vaccinated to enter Canada.
Come Saturday, new rules mean unvaccinated truckers entering Canada will be subject to testing and quarantine.
Everyone, every trucker entering into Canada or every Canadian or American trucker transiting to Canada must be vaccinated.
The tighter restrictions put an estimated 10,000 truckers off the road, but the actual number is likely much higher.
Prior to that, truckers had been exempt from the vaccine mandates because they were considered an essential service, and the Trudeau decision was accordingly quite unpopular with the trucking industry.
Unvaccinated drivers have been delivering loads since March of 2020 because as essential workers, they've always been able to go.
But that said, it quickly became clear that the vaccine mandate was really just the pretext for a much more wide-scale protest against the idea of COVID restrictions more broadly.
So it was just COVID restrictions more broadly. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's more like, and everybody else who had mandates imposed upon them and didn't like the mandates imposed upon them. You know, like, this is another ongoing thing that more, hate to say it, but like more mainstream media people, mainstream media types have this idea of like, oh, it was just the truckers protesting. It was just about the mandate for the truckers. No, it was about all the other mandates happening. Like, you couldn't even go to, like, people were kicked out of university, were they not? Like, there were so many other mandates that applied in so many different industries. Some of them still are around today. And just to say, oh yeah, the COVID restrictions. It's like, no, man, people couldn't get into restaurants. People couldn't leave the country. That doesn't even come up. That doesn't even come up in this video, JJ. Like, come on, bro. Oh my God, it was just restrictions that, you know, these right wingers were complaining about. Fair and objective analysis. Yeah, okay.
For a much more wide-scale protest against the idea of COVID restrictions more broadly. A manifesto posted on the Freedom Convoy Facebook page and signed by the two people usually described as the ringleaders of the protest listed 4 key demands: an end to vaccine passports and all other obligatory vaccine contract tracing programs, an end to vaccine mandates, cease the divisive rhetoric attacking Canadians who disagree with government mandates, and cease to limit debate through coercive measures with the goal of censoring those who have varying or incorrect opinions. Or, as a fellow in a viral video summed it up,
the honking will continue until freedom improves. Simple as that.
From the
Yo, shout outs the ferryman's toll, the meme lord himself. I love how that made it in. Yeah. But yeah, it's so funny. He's like, oh, we don't know what the protests are about. It was a right-wing malaise. And then he lists off what the protest was about, like what the main organizers, you know. So like, why did you have that whole detour on right-wing malaise anyway? Yeah, it's ending mandates. That's the main part. That was number 1, ending mandates. The ferryman's toll, the fonking will continue.
Have varying or incorrect opinions. Or, as a fellow in a viral video summed it up,
the honking will continue until freedom improves. Simple as that.
From the start, the truckers singled out Prime Minister Trudeau as their main enemy, with Trudeau flags a particularly ubiquitous presence. This gave the protests a pretty partisan tint, but it also made them an important symbol of the broader drift of right-wing politics into a more populist direction, as explained in this quote from...
Before we even get into that, like, again, to say that anybody who was upset at Trudeau is right-wing, that seems really dumb. To say that anyone who was upset at Trudeau at that point is just a right-wing person, you know, like that's so like oversimplified and just I don't know. Like you couldn't be. My regret is I wish when I was at the convoy that I would have asked people like what they thought their politics was, Because there's a lot of people who I talk to who is like, this person seems like a liberal person. This person seems liberal as fuck. That person's like probably NDP. That person's a hippie. That person's, that person's apolitical. That person's, and so again, I kind of reject this idea that it was a right-wing Sure, there's probably a lot of right-wing protests, and there's probably a lot of people who, of course, hated Trudeau who piled on, a lot of conservatives who piled on, a lot of right-wingers who, of course, piled on. But this idea that, like, that was all it was, no, dude. The reason it was so big is because people wanted to oppose mandates, period. And for somebody who is very in tune with Canadian politics and loves to talk about it, JJ, something that happened down there that was magical was the unity between Quebecois and Anglos. Everybody was talking about this. How Quebecers were feeling Canadian for the very first time. The very first time. It was a beautiful thing. And it wasn't because they wanted to overthrow the government. It's because they wanted to end mandates, man. It's very, very, very simple. I feel like a broken record here.
From Rich Lowry, who's a famous American political commentator, the sense now is less, the government is bankrupting us, and more, these out-of-touch, self-appointed experts are telling us what to do because they have too much power and like lording it over us with the press, social media, corporations, and nonprofits all on their side. Because it was such a large protest, however, there were other factions and other arguments being made as well, embodying other strains of right-wing thought, a particularly prominent one being conspiracism. People sometimes ask me...
Here we go. So I just want to interject here for a quick minute. Like, there's such a perspective from JJ's analysis here that is of the journalist class, of the sort of like, not necessarily the ruling class. No, yeah, kind of the ruling class, because it's all in that sphere of journalism. And it's this kind of like haughty-taughty sort of, I'm in my ivory tower. Let's see how this will benefit the conservatives. Let's see how this will benefit the liberals. Let's look at this from like a war room perspective of it completely leaves the actual people like out of the conversation entirely, like so much of this analysis just is for journalists, for the kind of like political class, nothing to do with actual, working Canadians whatsoever. That's why he kind of brings up all these, he is a columnist for the Washington Post, so that kind of explains it. But anyway, let's keep this moving here.
If there are any uniquely popular conspiracy theories in Canada, and I usually reply by calling attention to the so-called sovereign citizen type stuff, which is when people put forward these theories that because, the Canadian Constitution was signed the wrong way in 1921 or whatever, all of our laws are actually illegitimate and the government doesn't actually have any power to arrest you if you break one of their phony laws and so forth. Early on in the protest, there was a petition circulated by a certain faction of the truckers and signed by over 320,000 online...
I don't think I ever heard about this Citizens of Canada Committee, but as JJ just said, apparently 300,000 people, 300,000 online signatures signed it. I never heard about this, which is pretty interesting.
The truckers signed by over 320,000 online supporters that offered a fairly bizarre interpretation of the Canadian political system in which the Canadian Senate and Governor General were called on to assert powers they do not have and create a weird new interim government for Canada that would then repeal all of the COVID restrictions. The Governor General, in particular, who is the representative of the British Queen in Canada, became a particular subject of fascination by this set and was bombarded around the clock with demands to fire Prime Minister Trudeau.
I think what's noteworthy here is that JJ will bring up this like whole conspiracy angle to the convoy, which I don't think most people there have even heard of. Yet he doesn't even bring up in this video the fact that people had their bank accounts frozen for donating to the convoy. Like that's a whole saga of the money that got donated towards the convoy. He mentions how it might have been majority American, and I'm pretty sure that was bad information that he's working on, but that was right after the convoy, so you can't really blame him. But the convoy, regardless, raised more money than major political parties. Like that's such a big factoid that the trucker convoy raised more money than the largest political parties in our country. And they were freezing bank accounts. They were freezing bank accounts. Like when that seems like a noteworthy thing to mention, JJ. But sure, once again, like the Canadian news media, let's scrutinize the protesters harder than anybody else. And oh, look, I found a conspiracy document amongst all these protesters. Yeah, they're crazy. How about the fact that the government is freezing bank accounts for a lawful protest in a democratic country? Do you want to bring up that, JJ? Is that noteworthy? Is that part of your fair and objective analysis of the trucker convoy? When's the last time that happened? Bank accounts being frozen.
Also not remotely within her authority to do, but crazy theories about the power of the crown often play a prominent role in Canadian conspiracy theories of this flavor. Now, regardless of how persuasive or not you find any of this stuff, in many ways, the much more significant thing about the truckers' protest was just that it involved truckers. Leaving aside the question of how representative a convoy of a few hundred trucks was of the interests or opinions of Canadian truckers in general, who are a huge and diverse community, the most relevant variable explaining why it had the impact that it did was just that it used trucks. Parking gigantic trucks in a city's downtown core in a fashion designed to cause maximum obstruction and frustration was undeniably an extremely creative and unprecedented tactic that proved remarkably effective, at least in the short term. On February 7th, the CBC published a good piece that described in considerable detail how towing a giant truck is difficult or almost impossible without the driver's cooperation, and even harder still when the tow truck companies themselves are refusing to offer their services out of solidarity or fear.
Several independent contractors and companies have publicly supported the convoy and are refusing to tow trucks in the protest. Those who have offered assistance are being threatened.
We could very easily make a whole other video just analyzing the power of the protest from this sort of technological, logistical perspective.
So I need to interrupt here because there's so much that JJ doesn't cover. Yes, obviously the trucks were epic. Big agree. You know, he praises a CBC article saying it's going to be so hard to move these trucks. Another thing, another huge point that he does not talk about, he mentions earlier in this video how the honking is a way to kind of like impose or sort of put pressure on delegates to try and increase negotiations or increase pressure to try and get what you want, be obnoxious as protesters to try and get what you want, as in there's going to be some sort of negotiation that's going to happen, as in there's going to be some sort of reconciliation that happens. And that never happened. There was Trudeau did not talk to anybody. And on top of that, he said he had, oh, sorry, I got COVID-19. I can't talk to you guys right now. Well, he didn't even say that. He just said he had COVID-19. He refused to talk to the protesters and relied upon, once again, the misinformation that the mainstream media was saying about the trucker convoy, saying that we're a bunch of racist, misogynist, blah, blah, blah. And, they never came to talk to us, JJ. They never came to talk to us after 3 weeks, dude. And yes, we had a strong position with the trucks everywhere. But the fact that there was no negotiations that happened, despite it being a massive protest, a massive occupation for 3 weeks, again, kind of feels like a noteworthy thing to have in your fair and objective analysis. The fact that the prime minister of the country did not even acknowledge our existence, aside from the fact that we're a bunch of deplorables who just need to be dealt with.
But I think it is probably a pretty underrated angle of their success overall. So what gave the truckers such an innovative idea? Some pundits, such as David Frum, the famed Canadian-American political commentator.
Here we go again, man. Here we go again with this, let's have this hotty-totty analysis of, let's have David Frum's analysis. Nothing to do with the working class people, but here we go.
Has speculated about this a fair bit, and I think his argument is pretty persuasive.
The prelude to a lot of what happened in Ottawa was a year and a half where, through 2020, there were increasingly intimidating acts of interruption of essential services, pipelines and rail, by other kinds of protesters farther from urban Canada. And the federal government Justin Trudeau, largely looked the other way. And that set the table for what has happened here.
What he is describing is something that I am very intimately familiar with, living here in the province of British Columbia, which has been the site of enormous anti-oil and anti-gas activism over the last few years. Even during the trucker protest itself, there was a fairly violent protest in the northern part of this province at a natural gas site where mass protesters smashed up a bunch of property in an effort to disrupt the project.
Wow. So I'm really glad that he brought this up. Protesters smashed things up and destroyed property. Yeah. How many of them were thrown in jail? How many of them, did they have their bank accounts frozen? Did they get beaten up by the cops? Did this even hit the news cycle nearly as hard as the vilification of the people who just wanted mandates to end? It's totally lopsided coverage. He does kind of speak to that again, but once again, kind of in this weak sort of here we go.
The conclusion would be that there has been a slow normalization in Canada of the politics of, I guess we would call it physicality, for lack of a better term. The idea of using physical blockades and physical obstruction and even physical destruction as a means in which a minority faction can get their political views across. And as Frum alluded to, there's also a kind of jealous both sidesism going on, wherein the Canadian right perceives the left as having gotten away with these sorts of tactics for too long and are now willing to call the government's bluff by using them themselves. All right, so now...
Well, and once again, it's there wasn't one smashed window at the convoy until the cops showed up. There wasn't one sort of violent act caught on camera anyway until the cops showed up. So the both sides-ism is real, it's totally lopsided. It's totally unfair. There was no Emergency Act called when they blocked a main railway out in BC, which disrupted supply chains and all of that. No one was saying, oh my God, these Indigenous people blocking the railway, it's causing so much economic destruction. What are we going to do about it? They basically try to act like nothing was even happening when that happened. So, the bias is real. The lopsidedness is totally real. And at this point, to not emphasize that or to act like that's not real, I don't know. It's totally dishonest. And yeah, once again, JJ, you totally don't cover how the media covered this and really tried to vilify the convoy protesters as these right-wing monsters when that obviously was not the case. It was obviously just people who wanted to end mandates.
Now let us talk a little bit more about the whole partisan angle to this thing. The angle of the truckers' protest as a symbol of the poisonous polarization of left versus right politics that is becoming so ubiquitous everywhere these days. I wrote a few columns about the protests in my capacity as a columnist at the Washington Post, and in this one...
There it is. Say he's a columnist at the Washington Post. I mean, how conservative can you be, really, if you're working for the Washington Post? The honest question. I'm honestly curious. If you work at the Washington Post, JJ, are you allowed to say that there's only two different genders, or will you get fired for saying that? Genuine question. I might tweet that at you, but I don't think you check your Twitter often.
I talked a lot about the degree that the truckers had a uniquely traumatizing effect on people on the Canadian left or even center because of the way they embodied such a galling rejection of what had previously been assumed to be pretty solid public support for Canada's COVID policies, as I put it.
Well, before he says this, yeah, we pop the bubble of the mainstream media bubble. Everybody's living in this mainstream media bubble, and it's nope, that's only a small percentage of the country actually watches and believes that stuff. There's a lot of people who just wanted to end mandates,
A festival of partisan division and anti-government bombast in the nation's capital is a painful unraveling of presumed consensus when the country's politicians and journalists have leaned so heavily on confident rhetoric of cooperation and unity to get through the pandemic. Canadian COVID...
It's almost like the Canadian news media is subsidized by the federal government, and it's become a propaganda machine. It's almost like all that propaganda has, completely destroyed the sort of like honesty in what's actually happening in this country. And of course, when you have the dishonesty in the mainstream media and you're taking people's fundamental rights and freedoms away and taking their bodily autonomy away, there's going to be consequences to that. And in this case, it was the trucker convoy. It's really not that hard to figure out.
Policies have not been the strict COVID policy and rhetoric of cooperation and unity to get through the pandemic. Canadian COVID policies have not been the strictest in the world by any stretch.
Really? Did you just say that? Hold on.
And journalists have leaned so heavily on confident rhetoric of cooperation and unity to get through the pandemic. Canadian COVID policies have not been the strictest in the world by any stretch, but they have.
How many different countries had the ArriveCan app, JJ? How many different countries had an app like ArriveCan, where essentially you have to give all of your personal information to enter Canada? You have to give your address, this and that and the other. Typically, just for those who don't realize this, back in the good old days, or not even back in the good old days, if you refuse to download the ArriveCan app, you don't even have your home address on your passport. You just have your birthday. And that's all that's on your passport. That's all the government needs to know about you in that respect. But with ArriveCan, it's like, here's my email, here's my phone number, here's my address, all that stuff. Not the strictest by a really. I think you're gonna have to fact check that one, my friend. Who else had curfew? There's curfew in Quebec. Who else had curfew? And like to say that it's like not by far not the worst COVID restrictions in the world. Curfew's pretty bad. How much worse does it get than curfew, bro? Yeah.
Have been fairly uniform across the country, with basically every province having a similar regime of mandatory masking and vaccine passports and targeted shutdowns, regardless of what party was in charge. There was like.
I just hate and like those were the rules. Yeah, those were the rules here in Canada. Notice how the rules aren't here anymore, by the way. How some of those rules do not exist anymore. And in many cases, it happened not many cases, but in some cases, it happened right after the convoy. More on that later.
Likewise, a lot of coverage in the Canadian press that presented such policies as not only broadly popular, but patriotic, easy, and natural for Canadians to follow, because Canadians supposedly are just inherently passive people who love doing what they're told. The line I will always remember was from this 2020 editorial from the Toronto Star, Canada's biggest newspaper, declaring, "At core, our national DNA favors the collective during a crisis that has demanded collective action, mutual sacrifice, looking out for the other, rather than insistence on personal liberty and pursuit of happiness."
I'm so tired. I am so tired of hearing people in their ivory tower tell me what being Canadian is. I am so tired of hearing all these journalists and all these politicians saying, I'm going to tell you what being Canadian is. At core, our national DNA favors, like, and the thing is, I think there's actually truth to that, to this quote. Looking out for the other, rather insistence on personal liberty and pursuit of happiness. I mean, I don't know. This quote, what bothers me about this quote is that it's from the Toronto Star, and it's obviously trying to craft a narrative, right? The people at the convoy were certainly looking out for each other because they had personal liberties and the opportunity to have a pursuit of happiness taken away from them. So in this quote, they kind of like they pit it against each other, right? It's either you're looking out for each other or you care about freedom, right? Which is a false dichotomy. I hate the fact that anyone is like going to like prop up a quote from editorial in Toronto Star, and it's a fair and objective analysis of the trucker convoy. Yeah, right, man.
and pursuit of happiness. At one time, this sort of thing was being published everywhere, alongside plenty of America bashing, which of course is always hard to escape in this country. The idea being that while Americans were acting like wild yahoos, screaming about freedom and refusing to wear masks, Canadians were obediently whipping out their vaccine passports to visit their local library or whatever. But then the truckers happened, and suddenly a lot of progressive Canadians were aggressively reminded that this country does indeed contain plenty of people flamboyantly opposed to vaccine mandates and all the rest of it. Liberal columnists.
Good. Damn right, man. We're out here. We're the real Canadians, by the way. We're the real Canadians. Okay, not these Toronto Star editorialists.
Went from praising our national DNA to writing morose things like "Blight no more, the world sees Canada very differently now," or "The Canadian flag as a national symbol has been critically injured." You know.
Cringe.
Because the truckers waved it. Although I will note that one popular cope to all of this was casting the truckers as being fundamentally foreign, which is to say American, either by calling attention to how much money they were getting from Americans, which one study suggested was almost half of their fundraising.
A study suggested, not the actual facts, right? It was a study that suggested this.
Or by making more chauvinistic arguments about how Canadians had been radicalized by their proximity to American politics and media. For example, here is a piece from the New York Times that quotes a man named Gerald Butts, who was, and I suppose still is, one of Prime Minister Trudeau's closest advisors. For 2 years, Canadians have been largely stuck at home, and many have spent more time in front of the screen than ever. As they did, they absorbed the American culture war being played out from Fox News to Breitbart, and Trumpian ideas took root in Canada, said Gerald Butts, a longtime friend of Mr. Trudeau's and his former
There you have it, folks. There you have it. In JJ McCollough's fair and objective analysis of the trucker convoy, we have Gerald Butts quoted as being a fair and objective voice to what happened at the trucker convoy. Like, you gotta be kidding me, bro. You gotta be kidding me, bro. And this is the thing. Like I've said, it's not that deep. It's not that deep as you know, it's so, it pisses me off so much, this perspective from Gerald Butts too. It's like, oh, the only reason people were complaining about lockdowns is because they were stuck in their home and they had to watch Fox News. Nothing to do with people killing themselves, nothing to do with people, you know, being more drug addicted than ever, nothing to do with like all of the terrible things that people had to endure during lockdowns and during mandates and restrictions, and all the small businesses that were destroyed, all the jobs that were lost, livelihoods ripped away from people, all the social division that happened because of the propaganda. No, it was because of Fox News. It was because people were inside watching Fox News. That's the only reason that people got radicalized by Fox News. Nothing to do with the terribly irresponsible, socially and economically destructive decisions that the government of Canada made. Nothing to do with that, right? No, it was because they were inside watching Fox News. Like, holy crap. That's such a garbage take from Gerald Butts, and I cannot believe that JJ McCollough is like, yeah, this is what Gerald Butts says. This is my fair and objective analysis of the trucker convoy. Man. And once again, like, to my earlier point, like, it's these people in ivory towers. Like JJ McCollough is kind of like he's in the journalist class, I guess. So they're just talking about, well, this is what this is going to mean for the conservatives or the liberals or blah, blah, blah. You know, like, it has nothing to do with the actual working people. It has actually nothing to do with the actual, you know, Canadians of this country. It's like, I don't know. It's part of this, like, it feels very elitist to be talking about things like this. And the whole premise of the video, I was on vacation trying to enjoy my vacation when this happened. I couldn't go on vacation, JJ, because I wasn't jabbed, so I couldn't leave the country.
Political aid. Now, as the weeks went on and the city, provincial, and federal authorities looked more and more helpless to remove the protesters from Ottawa, more and more attention came to be focused on what I would call the QAnon faction of the movement. Initially, Prime Minister Trudeau had sought to denounce the truckers by focusing on their supposed bigotry, characterizing the movement as fundamentally racist and sexist and so forth.
Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag.
And while some truckers did indeed infamously wave Confederate or even Nazi flags,
I don't have to make a comment here. We know that this is, the CSIS, essentially, who is supposed to investigate ideologically motivated violent extremist groups, which would fall under a Nazi flag or a Confederate flag. They have no information on these people, despite even having the visible.
And while some truckers did indeed infamously wave Confederate,
you can see the license plate number here. And when CSIS was questioned about the license plate number, they under oath at the Emergencies Act inquiry, they had nothing to say. So this is supposed to be our intelligence agency in Canada. Hey, you're investigating ideologically, violent extremist groups. Did you investigate this person? They had nothing to say. Which leads people, it supports the theory that these were literal false flags. These were literally planted to try and make the protest look bad. And once again, back to a point that JJ misses entirely is the misinformation or this sort of mischaracterization of this protest from the beginning from the mainstream media to make us look like these right-wing monsters. Kind of a big part of the equation. Because as I said, this isn't just about the convoy. This is about the rise of an authoritarian regime in Canada. Not even the rise, more just kind of them taking their mask off and being like, yeah, we're an authoritarian regime, bro. Welcome to Canada. We're going to lie in the media. We're going to freeze your bank account. We're going to beat you up with police horses and not talk to you. This is Canada now.
Or even Nazi flags, Trudeau wound up getting a fair bit of pushback from the press and public for this particular line of rhetorical attack. I suspect because it struck a lot of people as a somewhat gratingly tendentious take from Trudeau. Who
gratingly tendentious take? These simpletons don't understand. I am a columnist for the Washington Post, you see. It's such a... I digress.
Talk this way about everything. To most people, the worst thing about the truckers was just how horribly obstructive they were. And Trudeau's numbers have accordingly taken a bit of a dive recently as he shoulders a fair chunk of the blame for not moving swifter to deal with them.
Not moving swifter. Also, once again, JJ not even talking to the protesters. Not even talking to them, saying he was sick instead of talking to them. It lasted 3 weeks, man. 3 weeks in the dead of winter, and he didn't want to talk to us. Again, seems like an important fact to bring up.
But the Prime Minister did move swiftly in the end. On St. Valentine's Day 2022, Prime Minister Trudeau invoked a very controversial piece of legislation known as the Emergencies Act that gave him short-term emergency powers to quell a public order emergency.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations.
No Canadian Prime Minister had done this sort of thing in more than 50 years, the last one actually being Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who had proclaimed a national emergency to deal with a flare-up of French-Canadian separatist violence in 1970. I would say that the younger Trudeau...
You should probably mention the fact that politicians were, if I'm not mistaken, kidnapped and assassinated or killed. That's when this War Measures Act was called last. And nothing even close to that is comparable to the convoy. And I suppose, again, you're out of the country, JJ. You're relying on CBC and Toronto Star articles, so I guess I can't blame you for not knowing, the disparity there.
Trudeau's emergency was probably less controversial than the old man's, only because the scope of government's emergency powers have been considerably watered down post-1970, and the truckers had become so broadly disliked by this point that the polls suggested the public was open to just about anything to get rid of them. But
Yeah. Why were they disliked? Why were they broadly disliked? Because of the disingenuous headlines, man. The disingenuous coverage. Like it's such a fair and objective analysis.
More about that later. In any case, as I said, to justify this unprecedented move, the Prime Minister and his people shifted to playing up the fear that the truckers actually posed a significant threat to Canadian democracy. Growing attention was given to the allegation that they wanted to overthrow the government in particular, which, as we discussed earlier, there was at least some theoretical interest in. But the day the Emergency Act was invoked also brought a bit of a darker tone to something that had previously been easily dismissed as just a kind of crankish crackpot conspiracy theory after the police seized a large cache of weapons from one of the copycat protests at the Alberta-Montana border. The government claimed that this was proof of the real and present danger of the protests.
What we're beginning to see emerge now are the hallmarks of a sophisticated and capable organization of a small number of individuals, but with a steel resolve, driven by an extreme ideology that would seek to overthrow the existing government and create some kind of parallel structure. Looking back over the course of the last number of weeks, and more importantly, seeing the developments of the arrests and seizures that have been made this past week, there's a real danger in trivializing and diminishing exactly what's going on here.
The emergency declaration.
Yeah, so once again, was it evident that Marco Mendocino was lying so many times about during the convoy? And that's once again, JJ, like you had the police chief lying about things about throwing a bicycle in front of a police horse. You know, you're not covering that. You're not covering the dishonesty from our public officials to essentially, you know, there's the whole like fake arson story. Like there's so many fake made up stories that the MPs lied about. And of course, they were trying to blame the Emergencies Act here on a meme country, if that wasn't clear. Like it's crazy, man. I'll bring up this article just for Diagolon is a time-traveling, cocaine-addicted goat, Tom Marazzo. Facts. That's fact. That's real. But of course, for some reason, Diagolon did not make it into in JJ McCollough's video. It was talked about in the House of Commons. It was talked about in the Senate. It is worth mentioning here in a fair and objective analysis of the trucker convoy. They tried to blame the Emergencies Act on a meme country, and they threw a little, well, I'm not going to comment on where the stash of weapons may or may not have come from, but again, like that information is still up in the air. What, 9-10 months later? So I won't comment on that, but to kind of just, again, JJ's video here is very much like, you know, normie tier, mainstream media tier analysis, in my opinion.
Declaration was popular with the public, but polarizing among the political class. When Prime Minister Trudeau eventually asked the Parliament to extend his emergency powers beyond the initial 7-day window he could proclaim unilaterally, the Liberal and NDP parties voted in favor, while the Conservative Party and separatist Bloc Québécois voted against.
I just want to emphasize again here, like, you know, he's coming from the perspective that you are a politician, or you are a political analyst, or you work in Ottawa, or you work for a political party in Ottawa. Like, so much of the analysis is that of somebody who is in the political bubble, the elite political bubble, nothing to do with the actual Canadian people. And as we'll see later, this is somebody, JJ, worships the polls. He loves the polls. The polls have never been wrong. It's like, hey, the poll said this. That's how the public thinks. Okay, moving on. Polls have never been manipulated, ever.
I suspect that the Bloc voting against had a lot to do with lingering animosity over the way that emergency powers were used to round up French-Canadian nationalists in 1970, which remains a sore spot with Quebecers to this day. In any case, the emergency powers pretty much worked. Once they were invoked, the government was able to basically just declare the truckers' protest illegal and arrest anyone participating in it. They could also finally legally compel those in different towing companies to remove the trucks and force the truckers to cooperate under penalty of serious fines or prison. In all, 196
Again, all of this to not have a conversation about mandates.
protesters were arrested, 115 trucks were towed, and over 3,700 fines were levied.
I wonder how many of those fines actually went through, and a lot of those arrests are not even real arrests. Most of them are just like, hey, we handcuffed you and drove you around the corner. Yeah, so not really real arrests. Just kind of staged arrests for show.
And over 3,700 fines were levied. The emergency powers have now been revoked. Ottawa is back to normal, and Canada's brief moment.
Well, it wasn't back to normal right away. It was actually, Ottawa was even less inaccessible, and it was even more inconvenient to drive around in Ottawa right after the police occupied it. They had fences up everywhere. They had checkpoints everywhere. It was even less accessible once the cops showed up. But anyway, if you're only consuming mainstream news, you probably wouldn't know that.
As a subject of global curiosity and pity has ended. The truckers quickly became right-wing folk heroes to many Canadian conservatives.
Because they are heroes. The truckers are heroes. And you know, actually, that's something that I didn't emphasize before. Like, another misconception is that it was just the truckers protesting for the truckers' mandates. And what the truckers did is the truckers were the ones to lead the charge. But every single trucker I talked to there were like, we're not just doing this for us, we're doing this for everybody else. This is about everybody else. Like that they all had the exact same attitude, because they're actually such like humble, hardworking, amazing, you know, salt of the earth people, just like the best people, some of the best people in this country, without a doubt. And to say that it's like that it was just them protesting is it's so silly. But yeah, sorry, I got distracted there. Let's keep going.
Truckers quickly became right-wing folk heroes to many Canadian conservatives, most of whom don't live in Ottawa, and thus had the luxury of observing the protest primarily as a grassroots pro-freedom movement that had arisen in opposition to a prime minister they hated. Many conservative politicians were...
Again, it's not necessarily hating Trudeau. It's like this simple rule, dude. It's the simple mandate rule. That's such a... That's such a cop-out.
Keen to try to cozy up to the truckers, arguing that they shared their concerns with the oppressive nature of COVID restrictions. During the heat of the protests, the conservative governments of Saskatchewan and Alberta both announced that they would be repealing all of their COVID restrictions the following month, a move that was probably on track to happen anyway.
Probably on track to happen anyway. That's exactly what some of the Canadian news headlines said. Oh, you know what? We took the restrictions away, but this had nothing to do with the trucker convoy. We took all the restrictions away. It had nothing to do with the 3-week-long protest that really intimidated and made politicians wet their pants. It had nothing to do with this massive uprising of blue-collar workers driving from all across the country to honk on our front doors. No, that was on track to happen anyway. Give me a break.
But was nevertheless framed on both sides as a sop to the truckers' influence.
It starts with truckers, but it goes far beyond truckers.
Some of the leaders of the...
this doesn't even make sense by his own logic, because he's essentially saying, oh, this was going to happen anyway, but Saskatchewan and Alberta made a nod to the truckers. But I thought the country didn't like the truckers. You were saying that on average, you know, the majority of the country didn't like the trucker protest. So why would these provinces repeal the restrictions and say they report the truckers? Wouldn't they say that they will repeal the restrictions and it does nothing to do with the truckers? Doesn't add up. Your perspective doesn't add up there, Jay.
The trucker convoy had also made the explicit demand that Erin O'Toole, the moderate head of the Conservative Party, be fired?
If they were smart, they would pull Erin now, right now. Get him out of there.
And on February 2nd, this happened too.
The whole stuff around the trucker convoy, I think, just added to the pressure and showed just what a weak leader he was.
So again, many might say that this was probably just going to happen anyway.
Like, really, dude? Like, really? The convoy didn't do anything, I'm telling you. This would have happened anyway. Yeah, okay, man. Okay, dude.
The new acting leader of the party, and the guy who everyone suspects is likely to be the next permanent leader, have both been far more aggressive in their opposition to COVID restrictions than O'Toole ever was.
That's only the case because Erin O'Toole was hardly aggressive at all. I don't know how much more aggressive Candice Bergen and Small PP truly were to mandates, especially when it mattered. Sure, he's gotten aggressive. PP's gotten all piped up now that all these trucks have shown up to support him. But I don't think he was really that aggressive beforehand.
Governments have taken advantage of COVID to try and take away our freedom and give themselves more power.
The fact
and case in point, I don't think he has really been that aggressive talking about this, because JJ's has all these mainstream media clips. Is this really the best clip you have of PP saying something like this? This kind of like, cell phone footage of him, like, in a parking lot somewhere right next to the trucks, right? Only once the convoys happened. Do you have a clip from the House of Commons months earlier when mandates were cracking down, when we were saying that 1 in 4 people support jail time for the unjabbed? Was PP speaking out against that earlier in January, or was he only speaking about that in the frickin' parking lot of the trucker convoy once it was politically expedient to do so? But he was much more aggressive against mandates. Yeah, okay.
Away our freedom and give themselves more power.
The fact that the Conservatives have chosen to interpret the truckers as basically the heroes of this story has some observers wondering whether this is particularly good politics for the Canadian right, given that the truckers were never particularly well liked by the broad Canadian public.
Once again, why is that? It's because of the misinformation. It's because of the horrible propagandists in this country, subsidized by the Liberal government, to try and make us look bad. I'm not going to go over. You guys already know this. But the fact that this doesn't come up at all in your fair and objective analysis of the convoy is kind of laughable at this point.
Conservatives, in turn, respond by calling attention to recent polls showing that Canadian public opinion has turned sharply against COVID restrictions, meaning the truckers' cause might still be a winner, even if the truckers themselves are not.
Once again, wow, the opinion sharply turned against restrictions during the trucker convoy, but the convoy wasn't popular. It's like, the opinions on the restrictions changed during the trucker convoy. Why? Well, it wasn't because of the convoy. It just happened to be a coincidence. They weren't popular at all. It's so schizophrenic in a way. Like, it's so schizophrenic how these people are like, yeah, people's opinions on restrictions changed during the convoy. It had nothing to do with the convoy, had nothing to do with this massive protest, though. I don't understand how people can hold both of those ideas in their head at the same time. It's crazy. I'm trying to find the article. There was an article, though, in some Canadian newspaper that basically said, like, hey, guys, we're repealing the restrictions, and in brackets, but it had nothing to do with the convoy, which totally puts it, summarizes the absurdity of it.
Given that Prime Minister Trudeau's popularity has taken quite a hit from his perceived mismanagement of the protest, the Conservatives are mostly feeling empowered by how things have played out. And talking of polls, lastly, I just want to call your attention to some rather stark numbers regarding how the Canadian public thinks that unruly protesters should be handled. I think this gets at one of the most underreported aspects of the Canadian public, which is just how much support there tends to be in this country for harsh treatment of troublemakers.
There's been a lot of underreported things in this video, JJ, but please continue.
A Maru poll found 64% of Canadians supporting the idea of using the army to remove the truckers from the capital city. A solution considerably more extreme than anything Trudeau actually did, even with the emergency powers.
Well, they did consider getting tanks, right? They were texting each other about getting tanks, we discovered during the inquiry. So that's, I mean, a tank, that sounds like the military, I think.
67% agreed with the statement, "It's time to clear out the protesters in Ottawa, even if it means people who will not leave may get hurt or worse." This tracks quite closely with the sort of polling data that we've seen in response to some of the environmental protests of the past that so irritated David Frum, suggesting that the relevant issue in the eyes of most Canadians is the fact that people are protesting in an obstructive or disruptive manner rather than the cause that they're protesting for. It strikes me as a reflection of just how rigidly order-obsessed the broad Canadian middle class tends to be.
I mean, all this what gets called into question here is like, how accurate are these polls, first of all? But let's assume that they are. You know, more Canadians are acting pro-authoritarian. You know, that's the creepy thing. That's the creepy kind of revelation that's happened not even during the convoy, but before the convoy. All these people who are okay with the mandates, all these people who are okay with all these restrictions, that's messed up. That's messed up. What is wrong with Canadians out there who are essentially okay with like daddy government telling them what they can and cannot do? Oh, I love having curfew in Quebec. I love it when my premier says I can't leave my house after 10 p.m. like I'm a prisoner. Yeah, it is messed up. And well, we'll finish. I think there's more stats he wants to show here.
A tendency that I do feel we should all keep an eye on because it can go in some rather dark places if left unchecked. For instance, a different Maru poll offered up this option. "Regardless of my politics, I would vote for a strong-willed person to have enforceable law and order," in what I think was obviously supposed to be a testing of the water of the authoritarian instincts of the Canadian public. Yeah, and it got 71% in favor. Protests do have the capacity to change politics, just not always in the way that the protesters themselves expect.
So I think he's trying to imply there that the convoy made more Canadians pro-authoritarian. And, well, actually, maybe that is an insight to take away, because my takeaway from the convoy, having been there and having experienced everything, was that the mask for the Trudeau regime had fallen off, and it's like, oh, you're an authoritarian scumbag who doesn't care about my freedoms at all. You care about power. And yeah, but you're right. These polls that he shares at the end are quite creepy because it reflects on the Canadian public being okay, being all right with this authoritarianism. I'm getting distracted here. Super chat from Mechanics, $20. He says, "Merry Christmas." Thank you, Mechanics. I appreciate it. What else is there to say about this video? He didn't talk about the misinformation in the Canadian news media, completely vilifying the protesters. It's too bad that someone like JJ McCollough just is kind of echoing everything that we've seen in the Canadian news media. You know, it's too bad. It's too bad that he's going to kind of just, you know, quote Jerry Butts and say like, yeah, this is an important part of the analysis here. It's certainly the perspective of somebody who did not consume alternative media, did not consume anybody who was on the ground. I mean, he's not even going to mention bank accounts being frozen. He's not gonna mention people getting arrested. He's not gonna mention a sitting politician, Randy Hillier, getting arrested and all the trumped up charges that happened there. Like you're not gonna talk about the people being authoritarian and having an authoritarian sensibility at the end of the video here, but you're not going to talk about the government acting authoritarian, JJ? You don't think that's relevant to bring up? You don't think it's relevant to bring up the frozen bank accounts and all the other things that had happened with the propaganda news media? It's unbelievable, guys. It's unbelievable. Someone said, Bearded McNasty said, spam JJ's comments telling him to watch this, everyone. Okay. I appreciate that, Bearded McNasty. Whatever you do, just don't make fun of him, okay? Don't send any hateful comments. That doesn't help me. That doesn't help us at all. Yeah. I'm really glad I got this off my chest because this video is really, really bothering me. If the video was JJ McCollough's perspective on the Canada trucker protest, I wouldn't even really care. I probably wouldn't have even reacted to it. But it's the fact that he calls it a fair and objective analysis while he was outside of the country when it happened, and he's bringing up mainstream news article after mainstream news article. It's like, come on, dude. Come on, man. I mean, he didn't really emphasize the fact that it came from all across the country. Like that's kind of a pretty epic thing. The fact that Quebecers and English speakers were getting along for like probably the first time in a long time is amazing. Bank accounts being frozen didn't get brought up. And all the mischief charges that happened, the diagolon, that's something that like not nearly enough people know in general, but you know, oh man, even I try to forget what it was like a year ago. More than 1 in 4 Canadians support jail for the unjabbed, you know, and that's alongside, you know, the headlines from Toronto Star saying, you know, well, we all know that Toronto Star front page where it was just like, I don't care if unjabbed people die, basically, right? You know, things were hitting a fever pitch. People needed a solution. People wanted it. The pressure was cracking down on us, you know, and that's why the convoy happened, to fight these mandates. But anyway, I'm just rambling on here. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. You can become a member here on YouTube and Facebook. You'd really be helping me out. You can also send a donation if you really like me. Shout outs to Chelsea Hillier. Thanks for watching. But we're going to talk to you guys soon. And I love you all.